And lastly, we come to an idea of landmarks. So a landmark is a point reference, essentially like a node, uh, in that it's sort of a singular point, but separate in the fact that you cannot sort of enter into it. You can't. You understand sort of landmarks from without, from outside, and that there is some sort of room here. Like if a landmark is like a tower, I guess you could eventually sort of enter into the tower, but that's sort of a space and experience unto itself, and where the landmark itself doesn't really play a part in the navigation of space anymore. The landmark is a landmark is sort of when you're outside of it. That's when it's useful in sort of understanding a space. So point references that really stand out, and you can see from lots of different angles. It's something that contrasts out from other spaces, which is why a lot of times we'll use something really tall that sort of towers over things, like a tower or like a mountain, a building, a sign, that sort of thing, maybe a tree, I don't know, something, but it has to be something that sort of stands out as completely different from other objects around it in order to really be a landmark, because you really need to understand what makes a landmark special is when you can understand it and recognize it as being the same landmark from a lot of different perspectives. So landmarks can be distant landmarks, like we talked about, like a tower, that sort of thing. But some, can be very local. So coming into a new space and you see this stack of rocks here, and there's a story here. Someone, maybe not a very interesting story, but someone stacked these rocks here with purpose, and so it grounds us in this space, and it creates a sort of memory relationship and an understanding of the spatial relationships of the spaces. It's essentially, landmarks are anchor points in how we understand sort of our cognitive mapping. And so here we've got an example here where we have actually a couple of different sort of landmarks. We've got some local landmarks. We've got this sort of fountain here that really kind of stands out from everything else. And then we've got this tower off in the distance. So here we're sort of aligning ourselves with, multiple sort of landmarks in order to understand our orientation in the space. So if we were to enter into this building and then come out maybe a different entrance, and see how our perspective has changed based on these landmarks, we can sort of mentally map how we exist in the space. So a lot of times when we talk about landmarks from a game design perspective, we refer to what Disney Imagineers coined as weenies. And this isn't specifically, I've heard other designers sort of like speak of weenies as almost like, it's always like this sort of phallic image. This tower over there, that's there's some sort of flagpole or something like that. And, originally this idea of weenies came from when Disney was filming with dogs, things like Lassie and things like that. And so in order to have dogs run from one area to another, they would use sausages. They would use those as incentive to get the dog to run across the camera, or run across where the camera was pointing. And so when it came down to talking about park design, and there have been a lot of talks and things written about how games can learn from theme park design, and weenies kind of are a big part of that. Essentially, I want you to think about, we could call your landmarks weenies, but the idea is that I don't want you to have your idea in your mind that a landmark is necessarily some far off tower, some far off position that you'll eventually get to. Landmarks are everywhere. They are, and as what I was talking about in last week's lecture, we use landmarks in our spaces as the focal elements of the space. So we draw guiding lines toward, we use them in our image composition as we stand from our nodes. And we basically we compose not only sort of the local and the immediate landmarks, but also the far off landmarks to tell us where we are and where we're going.